art of horror is also the art of mystery and ambiguity, which is why it's common to see characters kept in the shadows with minimal screen time. Michael Myers, Jigsaw, Freddy Krueger, and even the shark in Jaws are all in their movies for less than 10 minutes, proving that you don't need a whopping runtime to become iconic. However, there is a difference between minimal on-screen moments and appearing in only one scene. While characters like these aren't in their films a lot, they still skulk about in the peripherals and are constantly on the lips of the main characters, meaning their presence is ever felt. Now there will be spoilers ahead, so you have been warned, and with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with the best horror movie characters who appear in only one scene. Number 9. Yoga Pants in The Hunt. This 2022 action horror hybrid opens with a pretty subversive approach. You're introduced to the main concept, i.e. social elites hunting degenerates, and then placed into the hands of Yoga Pants, a young woman who awakes in a forest alongside a bunch of strangers. It's easy to assume that this girl will be the main character, mainly because she's played by Emma Roberts. It makes perfect sense, as Roberts is an actor with noticeable star power and a bit of edge. She will surely prove herself, rise to the occasion, and oh dear god, she just got shot in the head in her first scene. What? Yes, the film gets off on introducing you to characters who you think will be important, only to have them meet a bloody end. Yoga Pants is the first example of this, as her shockingly dramatic and quick demise is a hilarious signal of how deadly this movie will be. Number 8. Browning in Hellbound Hellraiser 2. In the second Hellraiser installment, a twisted and sadistic doctor named Philip Chenard becomes obsessed with the Lament configuration, which leads him to acquire the mattress that Julia Cotton died on. To activate its devilish potential and bring Julia back from the dead, he enlists the help of one of his patients, the troubled Mr. Browning. Browning is a mentally unwell man who's convinced that he's covered in creepy crawlies. His skin is riddled with cuts and scabs from his attempts to rid himself of these bugs, but it gets a lot worse after Chenard sets him down on the mattress and passes him a razor. The screams of this poor unfortunate soul as he rips his skin apart and is subsequently killed by the re-emerging Julia will haunt you. It's a nightmarish and gruesomely visceral scene that still holds up today and is one of the scariest moments in the franchise. Number 7. Last Man in Mad God. If you've not had the pleasure of bearing witness to Phil Tippett's nightmarish Mad God yet, then you'd better boot up your Shudder account because it's a stop-motion animated masterpiece you don't want to miss. You'll see plenty of sights that will shock you, but one of the most unexpected is a live-action person. The movie is essentially a nonsensical delve into creativity, as it follows a few different characters and plot lines throughout the runtime. Still, the essence of the story centers on assassins being sent down into a harrowing hellscape of weird creatures, begging the question, who keeps sending them? It's revealed that a mysterious figure, the Last Man, is the conductor of this chaos, as he appears in one scene and sends another traveller down to their doom. The character maniacally chews the scenery and somehow matches the weird energy of the film despite not being animated. This character really stands out in a literal sense, as besides from some creepy surgeons, he's the only live-action figure in this entirely animated world. Additionally, you're given next to no information on him, allowing your imagination to explode with theories and thoughts on who or what he is. Number 6. Burgomaster in Sleepy Hollow. During the latter years of his life, Sir Christopher Lee understandably began to reduce the amount of time he spent on screen. This meant he could still pop up in big movies, but didn't have to burden himself too much, taking on what were essentially cameo roles. In Tim Burton's adaptation of the classic Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Christopher Lee appeared as a chief magistrate who sent the lead character on his quest to the titular village. He brought all of his signature gravitas to the role, with an authoritative voice, a commanding presence, and a sense of prestige. Now, while the character and performance are good in themselves, it's the hidden meaning that really makes this special. The entire movie is an homage to the classic British production company Hammer Horror, the same company that made Christopher Lee a horror icon. Having him appear, even if briefly, was a loving salute to the style the movie was emanating. Number 5. Vincent Gray in The Sixth Sense. If you want to talk about movie characters who had the biggest impact on the plot despite having the littlest amount of screen time, then you'd better mention Donnie Wahlberg's Vincent Gray. This troubled young man set the whole of Sixth Sense into motion. Vincent appears in the opening and gets the horror ball rolling immediately. He invades the house of his former psychologist and the lead character, Malcolm Crowe, and painfully sobs, claiming that he'd failed him. Then he takes out a gun, shoots Crowe, and then himself. Well, that's it then. Movie over. Of course not. Every horror nut has seen M. Night Shyamalan's classic supernatural flick and knows that this is only the beginning of the story. It's common knowledge that Malcolm didn't survive this attack, as this gunshot truly was fatal. Overall, despite only showing up in one scene, this character gave Donnie Wahlberg a great platform to boost his career and set in motion one of the biggest plot twists in movie history. Not a bad day on set, that's for sure. Number 4. The Pale Man in Pan's Labyrinth. Pan's Labyrinth follows the adventures of Ophelia as she tumbles into a world of fantasy where danger lurks around every corner, none more so than in the lair of this child-eating monster. After Ophelia finds herself in his abode, she betrays the rules and eats some of his food, which leads to a terrifying scene where he awakes, gobbles up some of her fairy companions, and comes for her. The character's design easily stands out, even when up against the cacophony of classic creatures from Guillermo del Toro's repertoire. His creepy hand eyes, skinny as hell legs, elongated fingers, and menacingly pale skin will leave you sleeping with a nightlight for weeks after watching this flick. Plenty of monsters struggle to stay in the mind of audiences after a whole movie, but this guy does it easily with only one appearance. Number 3. Lucifer in Constantine. It's safe to say that everyone knows the name Lucifer. The devil himself is a ubiquitous figure in religion and entertainment, meaning that any character who faces off against him is destined to have a hellish time. While far from a perfect movie, Constantine adds more fuel to that fire, as it delivers one of the best depictions of the fallen angel with only one scene to boot. Lucifer appears in this movie's climax, coming before John Constantine and preparing to take him to hell. But he's goaded into a confrontation with Gabriel instead and eventually bested by Constantine. The thing that really makes Lucifer special here is the slithery performance from Peter Stormare. He infills the character with all the intimidating devilry you'd expect from the Prince of Hell, but adds enough quirkiness to him to make the character fun to watch. He's frightening and charming simultaneously. Keeping Lucifer in their back pocket was a smart move for this film, as the mystery surrounding the villain made you truly fearful of what he'd end up coming out like. Number 2. Eddie in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Richard O'Brien's mind-boggling toe-tapping comedy horror musical is one of the purest examples of a cult classic in cinema. You can't go to any nightclub on Halloween without seeing your fair share of Frankenfurters or Columbias about the place, and that's a prime example of how popular the flick was and still is. Among its collection of iconic moments is a memorable performance from the late great Meat Loaf as the delivery boy Eddie. Eddie bursts onto the scene out of a deep freeze container, riding a motorbike and sporting a nasty wound on his head, a result of Dr. Frankenfurter stealing half of his brain. He then proves you don't need all your brain cells to rock and roll as he sings the banging earworm Hot Patootie. Sadly, the party doesn't last long as Frankenfurter gets jealous and brutally hacks Eddie to death with an ice pick. It's safe to say this entire scene, like the movie itself, is an explosive and bombastic watch, giving you a slew of iconic imagery and indulging in itself entirely. Meat Loaf took on other acting roles during his lifetime, but it's hard to find any that topped this one. Number 1. Casey Becker in Scream. Casey opens up the first flick in this iconic slasher series, answering a phone call from the demented Ghostface and eventually being hunted down and stabbed to death. Modern-day viewers might think of her as simple cannon fodder, but upon the movie's release, she was anything but. The advertisements for 1996's Scream banked on Drew Barrymore's Casey Becker, putting her front and centre of their campaign. It seemed obvious that she would be the leading girl, but after she concluded her first scene with a knife in her chest, everything you thought you knew was flung out of the window. This incredibly subversive moment instantly told you that Wes Craven's Scream was about to be a horror movie like no other. Besides that, the character herself was also memorable, especially thanks to the incredibly believable performance from Barrymore.